Welcome to Hoop Club Box 7, and our designer this month is Brie Harrison, and Brie does gorgeous botanical inspired work, lots of work inspired by nature and colour and beautiful ceramics. And I saw the illustration that Brie had done, and we'd been talking about a collaboration, and I just saw this illustration and I just thought that would be amazing as a cross stitch. So this is the original print that the teapot that you've got in your box comes from, and I just love all of these different teacups and jugs with the patterns on. So this is Brie's work, and I think it's translated really nicely into a cross stitch. So there isn't a really long video tutorial for this one, because once I've given you the basics of cross stitch, there's not really much to it, but I will go through all of the basics in case this is anyone's first time. We'll go through putting the fabric in the hoop, basic cross stitch, and then the only extra kind of skill is doing the back stitch on top of one of the leaves. So once you've cross stitched, we do that, and then I'll show you how to put the back in, and that's about it really. But I'll go through, and then I've got some kind of tips and tricks that I use when I'm cross stitching. But I hope you like this design, and I'm just gonna show you how to do it. So this is our box this month in this lovely turquoise green. It's quite dark in here, but that is a gorgeous turquoise green. I love it. And so in our box this month we have a magazine with information about Brie, and then your instructions. So everything you need to know, and the pattern here. And put in a lovely postcard of the original design, just because I thought it'd be really lovely for you to see the finished one and the inspiration. And then you have all your threads and your aider, and then your hoop and your needle. And we have included an extra project, which is exciting. So in this little bag is a project to stitch this little teapot, which I designed before Brie's project. I'd just done this little one inspired by a little ceramic teapot that I'd seen, coffee pot, and so I'd designed this, but I thought they went really well together, so we decided to put that in as a little extra. And that is there for you to use the needle in the kit, and you don't really need a hoop to stitch it because it's quite small, but if you do have a spare hoop at home you can use that, but you should be able to stitch it without the hoop. So that's your little extra gift, which I love. I'll show you that finished actually in a minute. So we'll go on to starting to stitch the main design. So the first thing that some people aren't familiar with if they've just started embroidery is putting the fabric in the hoop. So you unscrew the screw so that you've got a bit of wiggle room, and you place the smaller hoop without the screw on the table. You put your fabric over the top and then push the bigger hoop over, and then you want to tighten it. This is the only slightly tricky bit, is you tighten and then kind of, you might want to just pull any bits that are a little bit looser and tighten again, and pull any little bits generally around the top. You don't want to warp the crosses though, you want to keep the grain and the warp of your fabric really nice and straight. If you pull it too tight at the edges, sometimes you can warp the fabric, and then your design will look a little bit skew with. So just tightening that nice and tight, because the tighter you have it, the easier it is to stitch. So that's nice and tight. So the next thing I'm going to do is thread my needle. So this is something that trips quite a few people up. You have to split your thread. So this piece of thread that I've just pulled out of the skein has got 6 smaller strands, and we only need to use 2. So there are various methods of splitting your thread, but if you just gently separate, pull apart or pull down the thread, you can separate. And so I'm left with 2, and that's what I'm going to thread my needle with. And that gives us a really lovely definition. You can really see the crosses when you stitch with 2 strands of thread on 14 count, which is the size of fabric we're using. If you use it any thicker, it just looks quite bulky and you can't actually see that they're little crosses. So we're using 2. So I'm going to thread my needle. So I've tied a knot in one end, and I'm going to be stitching. So don't double knot it. Quite a few people, we get the feedback, have learnt to sew where you double over the thread and then knot it together like that, but that, I don't think there's any kind of embroidery where you would sew with the thread like that. I think that's just for maybe sewing clothes or doing mending. So to start, a lot of people get put off by cross stitch because the design isn't printed on the fabric, but it's really easy. The red cross here marks the middle of your design, middle of the design. So you want to start some point around here, and you want to put your first stitch somewhere in the middle of your fabric, because then the design will sit fairly centrally on your hoop. You can always move it after if you're not convinced it's central in the hoop. But if you do that, if you start with one of these squares here and start right in the middle of your hoop, then you will get a centrally placed design. And once you can choose to start with whatever piece you want. So you might want to start with this cream flower, and then once you've got something on there, it gives you context, and then you can count along from this kind of a first piece. It's the blank fabric I can understand is kind of quite intimidating, but once you've got something on there and you've counted the squares and there's the right amount of squares and they're in the right place, you can go from there and just know that, so this flower is just 1 square down and 3 across, that type of thing. So it is a lot of counting, but that's kind of like the therapeutic bit. So I am just going to show you one part. So the bit that I'm going to show you is this leaf, because you can start anywhere around here, like I said, but the bit that I'm going to show you is the leaf. I'm not going to do that because I want to show you this leaf, and then I want to show you how to backstitch onto it. So I'm going to start with this leaf. So now I've stitched my leaf, I'm going to show you how to do the back stitch. So we've put on the chart where the stitches go, and it is up to you. Oh, I did tie a knot in that. Let's come through. I need to tie a bigger knot. It's kind of up to you how big you do your stitches. You could decide to go over each square. I would suggest going over 2 squares at a time. So I'm going to go down here, and that's my first back stitch, and that then puts me in the right position to do the next one. And we're just adding this little bit of detail to the leaf because it looks lovely, and it just gives it a bit of texture and interest. But it's a very simple stitch, and it's just a case of going over your cross stitching. So it's about to fall out. It has fallen out. Anyway, you can see what I've done there. I'll carry on. So I'm just following the pattern, and depending on whether I'm doing a diagonal or straight, I'm going over 1 or 2 squares at a time. hard to see the contrast. And this is just a really lovely technique if you're designing your own patterns. Maybe you can use this. It looks lovely in contrasting colours when you go over your crosses. So hopefully that just shows you how you do the backstitch part, and that is as hard as it gets. This one is really simple. So I'm just doing this design and a few little tips. So I'm wanting to swap around and do different bits so that I don't get bored of the same colour. So I've started off doing the top handle bit, and I'm going to just leave the thread out of the top of the fabric so that it doesn't get tangled up below, and then I can go back to that later. And then I've just carried on doing this bit. And so there is a lot of counting involved in cross stitch, but so one of the things I think is good to do so you don't make mistakes is to kind of count, but also double check where things should be coming. So I have just done these 9 crosses down here, and I know there should be 9, but also I know they should line up with the top line of this blue flower. So I've checked that on there, and that there's 9, I've counted 9, but they also line up with that, so I'm like double checking that that's okay and is in the right position, because it is really annoying when it doesn't matter so much, the design would still look similar if you got things a little bit wrong, but it is annoying if you get things just slightly out of line and then everything else won't line up. So I'm just going to do some work on the teapot now. So another thing that I do is, because it does involve a lot of counting cross stitch, and that is good, and sometimes you're in the mood for that, but sometimes you might want to just stitch. So I've just done this little bit. I've counted the pattern all around the outline, and then at a later date when I just want to sew and I don't want to feel like kind of counting it, might be watching some TV or something like that, I can just fill in this bit and I don't have to count. So then the final element is backing your hoop. So I've stitched this on quite a small piece of Ada actually, so yours will be bigger, you'll have much more room there, but what I do is I trim it to about 3 centimetres. You don't want to trim it too close like that, otherwise you haven't got enough to fold in. Then we cut our piece of wadding. Don't throw this away, it's not packaging material, it's crucial. I just think it adds a really lovely quilted kind of quality to the front of your hoop when you put the wadding in. And then we have our cardboard back, so you push it in and you push down at the edges. If you're struggling, because each hoop varies in size, if it's not staying, try trimming a bit of the cardboard, but that finishes off the back of your hoop. Now with these hoops, we are moving to a white backed version of this, which is a harder cardboard, and so we'll have one white version, and we've slightly adjusted the size, so we're hoping that these will work a bit better than the ones where you have to push it down at the sides and look a little bit neater as well. So that is the back of your hoop and you're finished. And this is our bonus project. So you just follow exactly the same technique to stitch this cross stitch. There's no back stitch on this one, so it's really easy. I've put it in a hoop, but you could equally stitch it and then mount it around a square of thick cardboard or a circle of cardboard, and just use a glue or tape to mount it to a piece of cardboard, or you could frame it, but I will over the next weeks show you some different ways of presenting embroideries that are in a hoop. So that is your little extra. So I hope you have fun stitching your box 7 cross stitch. If you have any questions, let me know. just give me a shout on Instagram or drop us an email. We've got an email, hoopclub@cottonclara.com. So let us know if you have any questions or if you need any help, and I hope you enjoy it.